Hi, everyone. You're very welcome to our Work from Anywhere series. This is series 2, episode 3. Today, I'm very excited. I'm going to be speaking to two giants of the global mobility and business travel industry, respectively. Hugely grateful to have Olivier and Johnny on today. We're going to be talking about the Work from Anywhere white paper that we released recently, but using it more as a tool to try and explore what this means for the future of global mobility and business travel. So I'm going to bring both our guests on, Olivier and Johnny. It's great to have you both on. Thank you both for being part of today's episode. Really appreciate it. Maybe Olivier, would you like to start us off with a quick intro?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to discuss this very important topic. I've been in talent mobility for most of my career. I'm now based in Munich, working for Mercer in the talent mobility management team. So my role is essentially to design solutions to move people around the globe, so policies and tools. And I've been following trends for the past 20 years, so it's one of my great passion. And obviously, if you advise people on mobility, you have to experience it yourself. So I've been on long-term assignments, short-term assignments. I've been localized. I've been a kind of a global commuters between emerging markets for a few years, so moving from Latin America to Middle East to Asia. So for me, what we are seeing now about work from anywhere is really the conclusion of this evolution that I've seen in mobility for so many years. So it's something that's very interesting for me, but also very logical. We are moving from expatriate management to something much more flexible.
Interesting, that move from, like you say, expats who are a small percentage of let's say any company's workforce to now work from anywhere, which is a lot more people requesting it. At least certainly anecdotally, that's what we're hearing from people in both business travel and global mobility. But speaking of business travel, Johnny, I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years through a time in Culture Me and now the Work from Anywhere team. And of course, you were named as Business Travel News top 25 influencers in the whole world in business travel. But you've been influencing the edge of innovation in business travel for quite a while. Much like Olivier has been one of the thought leaders in global mobility, you've been very much that in that space in business travel. But can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing with Spotnana?
Absolutely. And great to meet you. And, I'm in the digital nomad world right now, dialing in from a little south of Manchester, UK, where I'm attending the first in-person airline conference, basically within the last 2 years. So we have a number of airline CEOs gathered here. But my kind of background is in corporate travel technology. I've been involved in a number of startups going back to the early days when online travel started appearing in the corporate travel program. I've been playing around with mobile technology and duty of care and employee location awareness solutions. Been involved in the AI chat, kind of intelligent personal assistant space, and now most recently I'm joined a new startup called Spotnana, where we're building, we believe, the first cloud-based native platform for managing corporate travel and the needs of the digital nomads, the work from anywhere generation, because frankly, their needs do not fit into the existing legacy tech stack in the corporate travel world. There's a big disconnect.
And maybe following up on that, Johnny, I'm curious. You're at one of the first airline conferences post-COVID. What's their view on this and where this is all going? What's their view of travel in general, and what's their view then of the sub-segment of work from anywhere / international remote work / digital nomads?
So it's interesting if you look at the corporate travel program, and I'm sure Olivier, you know it probably from being in a large corporation like Mercer, right? That in the pre-COVID world, we had corporate travel, which was designed to optimize trips of 1 to 30 days. And then in the other end of the spectrum, we had the expat travel, which was, generally speaking, 1 year or more. And now we have this new massive pool of emerging travel in the 30 days plus, but less than a year, 1 to 3 months or whatever it might be. And the systems, the procedures, the policies are simply not designed for that. So we have a big black hole, which is a great opportunity if you look at it with the positive hat. And I personally believe that it's a massive opportunity to design a whole new suite of services for that emerging segment.
I'm curious as well, Olivier, your take on that as well, because before we get into the white paper, I'm conscious of tapping your mindset and your experience, and what are you seeing around this in global mobility and in HR more generally? Because I'm conscious you have that exposure to the HR side. What trends are you observing here, and how are they impacting on HR and global mobility more generally?
Well, I think Johnny mentioned a very important point, the fact that some old definitions are not entirely valid anymore. I mean, like when we talk about talent mobility, it used to be fairly defined assignments. So long-term assignments, 2, 3, 5 years, short-term assignments, 1 year. And then we have seen that the landscape has become much more complex over the years. I mean, you had these traditional assignments are not really disappearing. You got people who are willing to market themselves globally. You got locally hired foreigners on local contracts. You got all kinds of commuters. And of course, with the pandemic, suddenly you got the international remote worker. So all these whole definitions are not entirely valid. Suddenly we have to manage very different types of assignments. They don't really fit in the policy that the companies have. So there is a real need to rethink a bit about the entire role of HR. It's not about moving someone from country A to country B as a kind of isolated exercise. It's more about managing this kind of distributed workforce. You got plenty of people on different status. Some might be expats, some might be foreigner local status, some people might be moving around, some people might be working virtually, some people might be in the office. So what we expect more and more from HR is to make sense of this complexity. Even though it was not officially part of their purview, now they need to rethink it and see how do we manage this consistently. And we see the need, for example, to tap into different teams, to connect much more, I mean, the mobility teams, compliance teams, risk management teams, the talent teams. We see a real change, and I think HR is just taking it on. It's part of the evolution. It's still a work in progress, but it's something potentially very exciting for HR.
Yeah, I think what I find fascinating with this is that it's definitely something that is hugely cross-functional. It's not one function can take it on its own. It has to be done together with other functions. But then, I'm thinking here now, Johnny, as well, people like Karen Hutchings in EY, like she's a real strategist. She's a real innovator. She's somebody that could, a strong business travel leader, like one of the biggest leaders in the world in that respective. So she'd be somebody I'd imagine would take some of that on under business travel. Whereas in other companies, Olivier, I'm guessing it would be HR or global mobility. Probably is, I don't know, maybe global mobility more the natural fit. But in any case, you have to have a strong input from business travel, from the other functions, from finance, from legal, from tax, from all the different functions to make it work. So I'm also curious what you're both saying as to where this is landing. Who's taking the lead here on this very often?
Interesting, you just mentioned Karen. I've literally had her on my panel here at this conference before jumping on here. So I know exactly what she's thinking about right now. And it is...
What is she saying?
Well, she's saying that her employee base is becoming incredibly more mobile. And it's no longer a given that they will be near the big, traditional office. She has to adjust the travel program to provide support to a new type of travel. And then you overlay that with the general talent kind of crunch situation, right, where finding the right talent is a massive challenge on its own. And now you can, for the first time, hire the talent regardless of location, assuming you have a way of, making the talent available where they have to be. So it's a new dimension in Karen's travel program. The other interesting development I've just heard recently is that, one of the big other consulting firms, PwC, is basically spinning out their entire global mobility business. So it's leaving PwC and becoming a separate company with 6,000 employees from day one, because they see such a massive potential in this corporate mobility area and with all the new challenges. So at least that means somebody's seeing big business opportunities around this. It's becoming its own entity.
Well, that's a great question when you speak about that. Olivier, I'm conscious two things. First of all, where do you see this landing? Is it HR, global mobility or whatnot, or business travel? And the second question, what do you make of that move by PwC, for example? I mean, on the one hand, you could look at it and say, hold on a second, this is maybe a non-core to PwC, and they said they'd get rid of it. And on the other hand, you'd say, well, hold on a second, it needs to be a separate business unit. There's huge potential, and the partners that run that global mobility function in PwC said we need to be able to run this as a separate business to create the value we want from it. Or what was your view on those two topics?
Well, on the first one, I think it's going to be a cross-functional topic. And that's something we've been discussing in the past. I think it's a bit difficult for a well-defined department to understand this idea of cross-functional, but that's what it is. You don't have all the expertise in one team. You really need to work across teams. So that's how I can see it. Probably mobility has a lot of input into it. I mean, they really understand the international issues, but it's a bit more than that. So it's going to be cross-functional. And regarding your second questions, I mean, the spin-off, I think it's not because mobility is not a topic. It's on the contrary, because you need to be more flexible. You need to develop new technology solution. And I guess that's the reason why they did this. Because being part of the big four, you have to be doing some auditing. This is limiting what you can do. I think they would have much more flexibility now that they are a standalone entity.
Yeah, interesting point. Coming then on to the white paper, were there any big surprises that came out of that for you when you read it? Olivier.
So from my perspective, I think it's a positive surprise, because you see how far we have gone in 2 years. I mean, 2 years ago, say working from anywhere, so no, not really. Now you see that firstly, I mean, half of the company are trying to do something, okay, to different degrees. I mean, some might be doing a lot, others are doing a little bit. You also see what's driving it. It's the expectation of the people, but also top management. That's very interesting, the CEO. And at the beginning, I know some people in HR were a bit reluctant, saying, look, CEO is saying working from anywhere, is it really feasible? But it's really a driving force, this combination of expectation of the people, the need to retain these people, and the other side, top management has get it and say, now we need to do it. So that's what coming very clearly in your survey. I mean, the fact that even they anticipate in the future is going to be one of the core benefits, something essential for at least some of the company. And I totally agree with that.
Well, that's it. It goes back to what Johnny was saying, this new segment emerging between, let's say, expats and business travel. And all of a sudden, that segment, all of a sudden becoming a core benefit, which can really help you get the best talent in that war for talent that you've both been speaking about. What about you, Johnny? Any things jumped out for you? Any big surprises?
I would actually echo Olivier that the biggest surprise is that what I've been hearing from individuals is already been reflected in your survey, right? That there is really a shift happening, and this has been recognized, and importantly, not just in the large corporate land, right? There's a lot of small and mid-sized companies that actually are seeing this as an opportunity to get better talent faster, because they can hire them where they are rather than have to find a way of getting them to a certain location. So for the whole kind of talent acquisition, I think this area will become such an important part. So your question before, will this live in HR, in travel, or where? I think it will be a hybrid in the small to mid-sized companies, and then it will be a dedicated team or an outsourced service to the new PwC entity or similar players, kind of providing the framework and managing this program. So at the end of the day, we have a complete new global requirement emerging, and that means systems and procedures and guidelines and administration. I know several companies who are right now battling with how do I allocate a travel allowance to a remote worker so it doesn't go into the traditional corporate travel workflow, because I don't want to micromanage a digital nomad's travel to a given location. I want to give them a certain budget, and then it's up to them to make the relevant travel possible under that budget. And I only see at the end of the year, is anything left? If not, here's your allocation for next year. You cannot do that via Excel. That's pretty hopeless. So we need systems to kind of manage and process this.
Following on from that, Johnny, one of the things that surprised me, well, it wasn't a huge surprise, but because it was what we were also hearing on the ground, was that over 60% of companies don't use pre-trip compliance technology. And you kind of have this gap between people literally either using Excel on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end, some very sophisticated advanced tooling technology, whatnot. But then this kind of gap in between where it's kind of almost no man's land to a degree, where people trying to manage complex risks in Excel or in an ad hoc basis. Is that also something, Johnny, that you've seen as well on the business travel side?
It definitely is. And you can say, John, the number of companies not having pre-trip approval is actually goes back to, I would say, the 2010-11s, when we started seeing more personal responsibility and we stopped doing pre-trip approval for every trip. It became more of, you have to make your own judgment if it's relevant and important or not. Now we are moving into the purpose-driven travel world. And that means it's not about the cost per se. It's about, are you prepared to invest time, energy, use sustainability budgets, basically, take your quota on this trip, or is it less important and you can do it virtually and save the energy and the money and the carbon emission for a more important trip in the future? So an intelligent way to score the importance, purpose of a trip is another massive kind of a new area that's opening up. And again,
I love the permissible travel framework by Festive Road. That's one of the things they link into that, going back into the purpose of the trip as well. And the Scott, one of the guys who's a great thought leader as well in business travel, has been sharing elements in that as well. But maybe coming back to one of the things that you spoke about before, Olivier, you talk about this shift from kind of mobility is shifting from company-sponsored mobility to employee-driven mobility. Can you maybe expand on that concept, that trend that you've been seeing a bit?
Well, if you look at traditional mobility, expatriate management is essentially the companies sending people to fix essential business needs, investing a lot of money to pay expensive packages. And of course, you always had people who were willing to move on their own, but it was not really a priority for companies. Usually they had segmented policies. So essential assignments were getting the most of the budget. You had some developmental moves. And then maybe you had a category for employee-driven move, employee-requested moves. But that was really only about facilitating for some people on an ad hoc basis. Now this is changing for several reasons. Firstly, the people are already willing to move on their own. So we see more and more people marketing themselves globally. So it's really, they are driving mobility to some extent. Secondly, they got the expectation. So that's the question of retention that we mentioned. If you want to retain your employees, probably you need to introduce a degree of flexibility. And the third one is a question of skills. We are really in a war for talents. I mean, in terms of skill sets, companies are struggling. They're not going to solve the problem in the next 5 or 10 years. We know it's going to be critical. So if you need to have a differentiator, you need to have these strategies. It's not just to allow people to do what they want for the experience. It's more than that. It's where do I get these critical skills? So that's the key question behind it. And I think we would not be having the same discussion if really there was not this critical need to find talents. That's really what's driving it. Yes, it's possible. It's also the expectation of the people. But it's because we are looking for these critical skills. And that's one way to address this shortage.
Yeah, very good point. I think one of the additional kind of technical elements of that is that sometimes the taxation authorities look at the difference between employee requests for work from anywhere or a business request from expats can have a different impact on the taxation side. So there's also those elements of it of complexity to build into it as well. But you're absolutely right. I think seeing that shift, it will have a huge impact. And in many ways, reflecting, I guess, Olivier, that shift that we saw in the middle of last year where a lot of, let's say, top-down hierarchical CEOs said it's time to go back to the office, but a lot of people said, no, we're not going back. We want to stay working from home. I don't know how that's going to turn out when the likes of international remote working becomes an option. But coming back then to, Johnny, to the business travel side, I mean, one of the things we could see pre-pandemic was a lot of talk about, let's say, Bleisure travel. I don't know whether it's something that hugely impacted the industry. Whereas if we look at it now, I mean, how are you seeing the impact of international remote work on the various sectors? You know, the TMCs, airlines, hotels. We're already seeing, for example, lots of different hotel chains, like of Zoku, for example, many others that are developing, let's say, remote work, and TUI as well, developing remote work solutions or packages for companies and individuals. But how are you seeing it between, let's say, the TMCs, the airlines, and the hotels? How are they adapting to this new reality, let's say, or how are they adapting to this trend?
Well, that's a question with many answers, John, because you can kind of put them into many different buckets. They are the ones who really see it as an opportunistic kind of a new window opening up, where they can go in and create a high degree of flexibility. You know, daytime use of hotel rooms as a place of work has become a case for some hotels who can see that the Monday to Thursday load is so low that they might as well just rent out the hotel by kind of daytime hours for a working environment. Others are creating new corporate kind of work bundles where you get a 2 or 3 day stay, which comes with a number of benefits. A daily allowance of spend in the restaurant or whatever, or they will manage order in. So they're doing everything to make it a really efficient place for temporary work. At least that's what I've heard so far in the hotel space. We're seeing the service department segment explode with a number of new players stepping it up, aimed at the corporate segment. On the airline side, to be honest, I don't really think there's been much innovation yet. I haven't seen airlines come out with new fare types aimed at a digital nomad traveler, or come into the corporate travel manager and say, if you have people who have a new type of need for a different pricing and rules of change algorithm, I'm flexible. I have not heard anything around that. So I think hotels have been more proactive than airlines so far.
And actually, a lot of the service providers that interact with the likes of hotels, seeing how they react. And one of the ones that jump out at me is, for example, seeing Meetings Booker, which is a platform for booking meeting rooms, basically. And then all of a sudden, they use an opportunity to create Hubly, which is all focusing on that kind of remote work opportunity space. So in some ways, it's a case of just repackaging, tweaking, or bringing in new brands to focus on it. But like you say, in other ways, some companies are not really adapting to it just yet. They're playing a wait and see approach, whereas others are being a bit more proactive, let's say. And then I guess one of the ones then, Olivier, I'm conscious of is just the challenges, or do you foresee problems arising between what employees are looking for and what companies are going to allow? I mean, especially for around how long they want to work remotely abroad. What do you think about that, where that's going to go? What challenges do you see?
Well, I think there are very different scenarios. I mean, you might be saying, I want to go for 3 weeks to work in Portugal. Could be one scenario, short term. Then you might be a little bit ambitious and say, well, actually, I want to do 3 weeks in Portugal, then I want to go to Thailand for 2 months and another country for another 4 months. That's already much more ambitious. Or maybe you say, I want to move to Portugal permanently because that's a location I really like. So 3 different scenarios. And to answer these different scenarios, companies are now trying to offer different things. They're trying to do the short duration, definitely. That's what we see when we say work from anywhere. Companies are trying to be careful. They don't want to trigger some compliance issues, so they tend to limit it, saying, okay, it's 30 days, 60 days. So they try to address that one. And then we see a lot of companies offering actually transfers, which is something different. Say, okay, you want to work in Portugal? Okay, then you have to be transferred. You go on a local contract, we facilitate it, but you have to commit to stay at least 1 year and probably several years. So the question is there going to be a disconnection between what the client actually requesting or understanding from work from anywhere and the reality of what companies are offering? I know some company, we call it work from anywhere. It's essentially these transfers, which is very good SAP. I mean, it's flexibility. For example, at Mercer, we're very good at offering this type of permanent transfer. It has been very successful, but it might be different from the expectation of an employee who wants to move from location to location. So I want to make sure there is no disconnection there. The company clarify a little bit what they're offering and really discuss with their employee about what their expectations are, because it's not totally aligned yet.
Well, I'm curious now, when you think about that, have there been companies like that you've seen, Olivier, that have been a real shining light or a brilliant example, or any that have come to mind? Maybe it's too early, maybe we have to wait a little while, but have there been any programs or initiatives that you've seen that have caught your attention?
It's probably the smallest companies. I mean, they are more flexible. They've been recruiting in different countries, so they are in a way already nomadic from birth. Essentially, they've been resourcing from different countries. And it's interesting because you see the tension in some industries. One good example is, for example, the finance industry. In the finance industry, you got some of the most conservative companies, like the banks, for good reason. I mean, they are heavily regulated. I mean, some of the jobs cannot be moved. But they also have the fintech companies that are essentially startup, very agile, and they are tapping the same talent pool. So that's something that's going to be very interesting. You see there that might be a competitive advantage for smaller companies to tap talent from bigger ones because they are bringing this type of flexibility. So I think that's something to be very interesting to follow.
That's a very good point. Yeah, because on the one hand, like you say, you've got these really conservative traditional banks and then these upstart fintech players that can potentially get the best talent. And if you're a tech developer, you can work remotely, and then having the choice between those two, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I'm conscious as well, Johnny, coming back to one of the points you made earlier about technology, teasing that out a bit. Why would you say business travel in general would be a bit slower to adapt technology? I know there's a lot of friction in terms of the architecture and the framework and the structure of business travel technology in general, but still, even saying that, the culture of embracing technology, don't get me wrong, there are some companies that do a great job, but in general, it's a bit of a slower industry to adapt to technology. Why would you say that is?
So it's a combination of several factors, because obviously most companies are aware that the model we still use for managing corporate travel is now 20, 25 years old, right, and due for a modernization. But we have a travel industry that's running on a kind of 20, 25-year-old tech stack at the core. And given that all bookings land there, our ability to kind of service the travel program is limited by that underlying technology. And I mean, that's one of the reasons we in Spotnana have come to life.
Yeah, how did you tackle that with Spotnana? Because that's a huge industry challenge. And how did you get around that challenge with Spotnana in that case?
Well, we actually from day one decided we are going to invest and build a new cloud-based order management system rather than the traditional GDS mainframe-based order management system. So you know enough about travel, John, that you know what a P&R is. We don't use the P&R anymore. We have said goodbye. That's a
Wow.
generational shift in terms of an infrastructure in the industry. And by moving away from a mainframe-based P&R to a cloud-based open API order, we can suddenly integrate and connect a lot of other systems and services much faster without the traditional barriers and protection walls. We're not compromising data security. We actually, I would argue, have higher security because of modern cloud-based infosec technology. But it took us 2 years to build this new infrastructure. And in a way, COVID was almost a blessing for us because the 2 years of no travel gave us the window to build this and get it ready. And now that we have that new foundation, we can literally do new things with the likes of the mobility companies and provide intelligent plugins to the tax compliance systems, to the location tracking systems from where do you perform work, not where are you from a duty of care. Of course, we can also do that. But it's all these add-on systems that were in isolation before or relied on a daily transfer of a data file. We have now enabled real-time integration, which is creating an incredible amount of innovation and creativity out there.
So that, I guess, coming back to it, I mean, that shows, I suppose, the opportunity for what you're doing with Splatnana, that I guess an industry that it tends to be a bit slower, that it relies on some of that old traditional architecture. Well, I wish you good luck with it, Johnny. Very exciting to see how you guys, how it goes for you guys, and be following it very, very closely.
Yeah, and as a relevant comment, we're now 160 people. We don't have an office.
You don't have an office. You're actually you're a great example of that work from anywhere.
When we started, there was no point in opening an office during the COVID year one, right, and not be able to go there anyway. So
tell me, how do you find building a culture in that? How do you? I know it's not directly related, but how do you try and build a culture in a work from anywhere mindset? I mean, I'm sure you get organized company get-togethers. I'm just curious to tease that one out, Johnny.
It was close to impossible until we could start moving again, right? We could not overcome the COVID restrictions, so we could not bring our people together. And after a while, it gets boring to be virtual together with somebody you don't even know, right? So now that travel have opened up, we have had all our teams meet minimum at a regional level, and we will be doing that on a quarterly basis going forward. So there will be a high degree of getting together. We don't have cost of office, which actually gives us freedom of spending more on bringing people together, again, when it makes sense, and do intensive project kind of sprints with the right people being in the same place. But
I like it. What about that?
Stay with it and see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. Olivier, then what's your experience of kind of creating a high performance culture when in a remote work or work from anywhere environment?
But that's a very important question. I think companies underestimate it because we see on one side some good example, usually smaller companies that are very comfortable with this. A few conservative ones that don't want to have this work from anywhere or any form of remote working. And the majority of companies are actually somewhere in between. It means they want to do something, they want to respond to the demands of the employees, but the culture is going to be very different. You might have some managers who get it, others who are not really comfortable, they don't understand what the other people are doing. You might have some employees who are struggling with it. They feel, okay, they are not part of what's happening in the company. So I think this idea of culture is very important, and it's not something abstract or purely philosophical. It's about how you do performance management. It's about how you get promoted. It's about how you do teamwork. So it's practical things. And I think companies need really to work on this. Because even if your headquarters is ready to do that, maybe your affiliate in different country is not. So I think it's going to be an ongoing exercise in this company to really educate the managers, how you manage people that are working from very different offices, from home, very far away. How do we reassure the employees that they're being taken care of? How do you make sure you're not losing categories of employees? I mean, there is something in your survey, John, about this idea of diversity that's very important. You might have some people who find that wonderful, this idea of working remotely, and other people who are totally struggling. It's affecting their work-life balance.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the biggest questions is how do we make sure that this culture evolves? And it has to be a conscious effort. Training, telling people, redefining our processes, and that's how a company can be successful.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, Olivier. One observation I kind of made during these 2 years with Spotnana being 100% virtual, it's very hard for people to disagree virtually when they have never met, because we have different levels of confidence of disagreeing virtually, right? So it actually there's a danger that you end up with a nobody will say no environment. So I think at least that's what I've observed, that some people are very, very careful about not disagreeing virtually with somebody they don't know, because you don't even know the reaction to expect back, right? So
So
that's been
how do you tackle that, Johnny? That's a crucial one.
Sorry?
So how do you tackle that, Johnny? How do you get around that? I mean, obviously, I think it just shows the importance of meeting in person and being able to, whatever it is, have a beer or get to know them or speak about their personal life, whatever it is, try and get to know them one-to-one. So you know their rhythm, you know what they're like, you know, and have the relationship built that you can disagree. But I guess that would have been difficult during COVID because you couldn't get to meet together.
We try to use, ironically, technology to at least help us solve the problem. So we released a bot in Slack, which would every week randomly pair you up with another colleague, and then you would basically have to spend an hour together virtually talking about non-work. So by having this random assignment of somebody else that you have no idea who was, at least we started creating this kind of cross knowledge about individuals that you would know very little about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
That's
no, I've seen that before.
the barriers.
Yeah, it's that's a good suggestion. And by the way, for all the audience, we'll be sharing if there's any tools mentioned. We'll try and share a lot of those tools in the show notes afterwards. Coming back to then, tackling this, there's so many different aspects, Olivier, on tackling work from anywhere. So many different risks to be aware of, but so many opportunities and the possibility for employer branding or retention and whatnot. I mean, how can companies tackle work from anywhere in a really comprehensive way? And how are the most successful companies going about this that you're seeing?
Well, I think the most important question is how much resources and effort you want to put in it. Because it's not a yes or no question. You can always find solution, but it's a question of time. Do you have the time to address every cases? It might be that you have to address things on an ad hoc basis. Every scenario is going to be different depending on the level of the employees, the country combination. So the successful company are the one who can really put in place a process supported by technology to manage efficiently the different cases. So it means, firstly, probably try to understand what you're willing to allow. Maybe you cannot be too ambitious at the beginning. You need to define, okay, for type of employees, duration, combination, this is what we might allow. And then building really this process, making sure you got something in place involving different teams supported by technology so you can really process fairly quickly, at least the first step, just to see, okay, is it receivable or is there going to be a problem? And their technology can really help filter a little bit. And then you can take a business decision once you got all the information. But it's very much about this question of how much effort. The companies that are not succeeding, it's not because they don't want to do it. It's because it's too much for them. It's too much of a burden for an HR team. So they need to really try to think, how can we be more efficient? That will be the key question to succeed.
Yeah. That's a very, very useful insight into how you can tackle this. Like you say, integrating the technology, the process, understanding the resources that you have. And I think it's ultimately going back and saying, is it right for you, for your industry, for your company culture? And I suspect if they've a high percentage of remote workers, it probably is, I'm guessing. And then, Johnny, you've always been ahead of the curve in spotting the most exciting, interesting startups in the business travel space around us. What are the startups in business travel that are grabbing your attention right now? It doesn't have to be necessarily for work from anywhere, but just in general, I'm always conscious to pick your brains on this.
So I'm seeing some, I would say, early signs that AI and therefore, virtual, call it virtual agents in the travel industry or virtual service providers in other segments, we are reaching a level of maturity of the AI technology that it actually will become real valuable. And if, take an industry like the airline industry, all airlines have thousands of call center staff spread around the world. Most of them are non-travel people who are given very, controlled scripts to interact with customers. I've seen 2 examples now of virtual agent technology that goes far beyond what a human agent can provide. So there are signs we're getting to that point. I think that's really, really exciting in a travel industry that's short of people, short of good service experience, and most importantly, sort of digital do-it-yourself capabilities. We're getting to that point, and that's great for the digital nomad world. The more we can enable to that segment, the more efficient it becomes. The other one is, I call it hyper personalization, where we will start seeing the travel industry give you an offer with a price that literally cannot be found by Google. In other words, today, as you probably know, any travel price will get found by Expedia or Kayak or Booking or Google. But there's new technology, blockchain-based smart contract technology, that makes it possible for a supplier to have an invisible price that is only assigned to you when you make a search. It's not loaded into a central database anymore. And that's interesting, because now the airline, the hotel, can start giving you a unique offer for your work from anywhere trip that is not loaded and cannot be found by anyone else. So those two kind of technology capabilities, I see incredible opportunity for in the travel industry.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the ones that jumped out at me as well was, again, talking about business travel startups, that there's opportunity segments emerging. Look at the likes of Troop Travel, that they were very much designed around helping people find the best place to meet, just for generally for conferences. But now with teams, let's say remote work teams wanting to meet up and wanting to be able to get the best price, or wanting to be able to manage it from a sustainability CO2 perspective, be interesting to see how companies like them evolve as well. But I get your point. The more or less the key message listening to you, Johnny, is the likes of AI and that technology really is catching up to the stage now where it can really deliver a massive impact and really take business travel, at least from a service perspective, to the next level. So then kind of looking to the future, work from anywhere, and coming towards the back end of our webinar, I think one of the ones that jumped out at me was, in the survey, over 55% of companies indicated that work from anywhere was going to be the core employee benefit in the coming 10 years, let's say, for them. And I wanted to ask you, maybe both of you, Olivier, you can start us off. Is this something you're also seeing, and what's your personal take on how this will evolve?
I think it's clearly a differentiator, but there is a big condition, and this condition is to make it consistent. Mm-hmm. So consistent teams, you have a clear message. It's consistent with what you're doing. For example, you're allowing remote working at a local level, so of course you're going to do it internationally. So you need this consistency, and you need to deliver it. At the moment, I think many companies are still reactive. They try to be a little bit flexible. They need to move to the next step to make sure that now it makes sense as a part of the value proposition of the company. You understand that if you join this company, it's actually more than the benefits. It's part of the ADM, of the DNA of this company. You really understand that with this company, you're going to be totally flexible. So it's a kind of second step. I don't think the company are there yet, but I think it's going definitely in that direction. I think there will be some winners and some losers. And the winners are the ones who are going to figure it out and come up with a clear proposal for their employees.
That's a very, very well made point. So rather than being something that's like a silo, that's like a sticking plaster, it needs to be something that goes back to your point, is fully integrated in with the culture and the identity and the employee experience of that company, because that's the best way to get the most out of it. What would you say to that, Johnny? What's your view on that? The fact that so many do feel that it's going to be a core employee benefit. How do you see that evolving?
So it's very clear in at least Silicon Valley, where I live, that travel is increasingly being considered a competitive element in the hiring process. And that makes even more sense when you start looking at the digital nomad work from anywhere environment. But at the same time, the employee don't want to run into a hassle of tax problems. So if you start making the travel benefits part of the hiring, you also need to provide the expertise around making sure everything is done correctly. So having work from anywhere kind of expertise aligned and coming in is going to be critical, because otherwise you kind of create an expectation and followed by a problem. And there are several big companies in Silicon Valley who have announced by end of this year they will have no offices anymore. And in the US, as you probably know, right, each state will then start demanding its share of tax of salary. Because wherever you spend your time is now where you will be income taxed. And there are no systems in place for tracking this or managing it. So it goes back to the core problem. If you want to offer it, you have to invest and make sure you can do it in a credible way.
Yep, completely agree, Johnny. I'm looking at one of the questions now. It's good to take some questions. Daniel had some some questions here on, how much resources do you allocate to a work from anywhere program? And he was also making the point that, from a risk perspective, what's the probability and impact of not implementing a work from anywhere program? So obviously the potential of employee attrition. But would you like to maybe take one of those questions? How much resources should you assign to a work from anywhere program? I guess there's elements of staffing and people, but also, technology elements of it as well, communication, whatever it might be. How do you tackle that?
It's a question of value. That's the other thing we haven't discussed about it. How do you measure the value that you're getting out of it? It's not because it's a trend that you need to do it. You need to see, are you getting some value? So there are some evidence that's okay, it's increased satisfaction, a little bit productivity, but it goes back to this question of skills. I mean, do you need to source some specific talents? If the answer is yes, you need to be focusing on what they need. And that's how you start deciding how much resources you invest. But you need to connect the dots. I think we should not be just taking it at a superficial level, saying, okay, we got some requests, how much do we invest? No, we have to do the homework. We need to step back and say, do we have an issue with some of our employees? Do we need some skills? Where are they? And then we can discuss how much we want to invest in this.
Well, so how do you measure the value then, Olivier? I mean, it's a crucial point. You can talk about certain soft elements and whatnot, but how do you go about in a very clear way? If a CFO comes along and says, okay, how can I measure my return on investment for work from anywhere? It's going to cost me so many people. It's going to cost me so much from a technology perspective. I know I'll probably reduce the risk of people leaving. How do you approach what is the value question?
Well, I think you know a little bit about the costs. I mean, you can calculate the risk and what would be the impact financially. And on the other side, it's essentially two things. It's about attrition. So it takes a little bit of time to monitor that, but you need to see, is it making a difference? And again, it might be making a difference with some group of people, others maybe not. So you need to monitor over time. Are we retaining more people? Are we losing more people? Are they progressing in their career as well? You need to monitor the progression of the people who are working remotely. And then the second question is more about the acquisition. So are you struggling with the acquisition of some people? What's the time you spend on this? How much effort and money do you spend to acquire people? Can you speed that up by tapping into some talent pools that are in other locations? So these are the factors you need to calculate a little bit to understand what value you're getting compared to the cost you're expecting.
Yeah, great. The second last question then is for you both, is what are your top 3 predictions for work from anywhere over the coming years? Olivier, you like to kick us off that one?
Mm-hmm. So, the prediction is very difficult. So what we can do is maybe taking some of the current trends and try to see where they're leading us. I mean, the first one is technology is going in a clear direction. It's going to be always easier to work remotely. We have seen that. I mean, we are on Zoom. Maybe 3 years ago, we are not really using things like that. So definitely technology going in one direction is going to be easier. And we can assume that this question from working remotely is going to stay and even increase as it becomes easier because of technology. The second point is a prediction about talent and skills. Again, we are not going to resolve the problem very quickly. So there will be pressure on companies really to do something. There will be some winners and losers. The third prediction is a bit more negative. It's probably the fact that, labor law and tax agreements are not going to evolve as quickly as technology and its expectations. So there again, we'll see probably some winners and losers, but this time in terms of countries. It's very interesting to see that some countries are actually trying to be much more flexible. So some small countries like Estonia, we're seeing Portugal, we're seeing Spain discussing. I think in a few years could make a difference for some of these countries. They're going to really attract talents just because they managed to find a solution to facilitate this type of move. Great
predictions. I love them. The point on countries is very well made. We had the Vice Prime Minister, the Taoiseach of Ireland, come out a couple of months ago and say they're worried because the high marginal income tax rate of Ireland means that, especially with a lot of tech workers there that are very remote work friendly, that can live and work anywhere, that there's a huge flight risk of their income tax base. So a real worry for some countries like that. Johnny, what are your thoughts? Top 3 predictions for work from anywhere?
So I think we're going to see metaverse technology. I call it metaverse on demand. Explode into virtual meeting. I mean, right now we're having what I call a square meeting. It's already becoming boring, right? Because you're looking at 3 faces in a square box. A metaverse kind of a VR environment where you move around, you can interact, but more importantly, you can join at any time in an online social controlled environment in a community you belong to, right? And see who else is here. And they can be from Sydney or Singapore or South Africa or Brazil or my neighbor. It doesn't matter. So these like-minded kind of communities online, I think, will become very powerful, and it'll spur a new wave of then being found by others as a talent, right? Because they will become a showplace for you to share your skills and potentially find your new job there. That's an interesting side effect from those environments, because I think we have maxed out what we can do in these square meetings. The second one is really technology will take over anything that's humanly done today with data analysis. You mentioned Troop. It is a fantastic example of technology doing something in 10 seconds that will take a person a day or more, right? And they generally come up with a much, much better recommendation that's data-driven and makes commercial sense. And companies and individuals who don't adjust to these new tools and make them part of their daily life, they will lose their jobs, because they don't have the right skills anymore. So I think people who are considered experts in the old world are at the risk of suddenly becoming unqualified in the new world. And then the third one, and I've talked about it for a while, John, but that is, I think blockchain technology, DLT, distributed ledger technology, will become the foundation for this new work from anywhere world. We cannot squeeze it into the old technology platform. It's too cumbersome, it takes way too long, costs much too money. But you can build these new frameworks that are open and secure and identity driven, and very quickly have a global tracking or capture platform for, hey, where did you spend last month working? So automatically your tax allocation is based on the blockchain dataset. I think that's the key to getting governments moving. They will track the data, and they will be ready to make laws accordingly.
I love this. I mean, this is why it's just a privilege to be, to have people like you both on this, is connecting the different dots, and it's multidimensional. You're bringing so many different aspects to it: culture, technology, the cross-functional elements of it. You're looking at it from both individual and also from a company perspective. It's been great. Thank you so much for coming on board. I'm going to ask you one final question. Olivier, you might start us off. You can work from anywhere in the world. Where is it going to be and why?
It's a trick question, John, because working from anywhere is
like
not
asking
about
your
choosing
favorite
one.
child.
It's not about choosing one, it's having the flexibility. So it's probably about staying at home, but then during the winter months, you go to Portugal or south of Spain for 1 or 2 months. And then during the year, having the possibility to catch up with colleagues, in Korea and Japan and Singapore. I think that's the beauty of it, having the flexibility and not feel that you got only one rigid way to do it, going on one fixed assignment. You can choose. That's the beauty of it.
Fantastic. You, Johnny?
Well, I would say I'm lucky enough. I've traveled so much that I cannot give you one place, but I would definitely like to spend 4 weeks working somewhere, come back home, wherever home is, for 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks somewhere else again. And my plan this year is to be in Hawaii, where my son lives, and spend a month out there. I'll have a month in Singapore, probably a month down in Australia, and a month in my native Denmark. Those are kind of my digital nomad segments that I'm planning for this year.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you both so much. You've been a real treat. I've really enjoyed this episode. Lots of food for thought. And it's great to speak to people that are so into the future of where this is going to go. Really appreciate being on board. And thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and apologies for the background noise here. It's just
No
impossible
problem.
to find a quiet place in a conference location.
Thanks very much, Johnny. Cheers.